Yeah, I know there was a like an anti-Bitcoin mining bill that was like moving through Texas that I
Right.
believe is now dead thanks to maybe your work and Pierre Richard and Riot. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like what was the bill and then like how did it not get passed?
Yeah, SB 1751. It's basically just an anti-Bitcoin mining bill, and it's not. I'm not exaggerating when I say that it is targeting Bitcoin miners. They say in the actual text of the bill, it goes directly after virtual currency data centers, which is basically Bitcoin mining. There are other types of mining out there, but 90+% of mining is done through the Bitcoin mining proof of work algorithm. So very much targeting Bitcoin miners. What the bill does in ancillary services, up to 10%, anything over that, they can't participate in it. So really limits what is really the best ability of Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining is one of the best grid balancing loads on the planet. And so if you're going in and you're saying, like, we want to limit this, the ability for this technology to balance the grid, you're kind of removing what is the best use case of Bitcoin mining today. We might find other use cases in the future. I think that we're starting to see some stuff around the potential for environmental cleanup and enhancing intermittent energy generation. But right now, the one that everyone agrees on is that Bitcoin is very, very good at balancing the grid. So it would cap that participation. It would limit the free market in that respect. And then also it would end any sort of ability for Bitcoin miners to get incentives to create rural jobs. In the state of Texas, there's a tax abatement program where any sort of industry at all, it doesn't matter who they are, they can go create jobs in rural communities. And when they build a site, and the property value goes up, typically the taxes will go up as well. So what the rural community will say is like, hey, we will allow you to get a tax abatement where for the next 10 years the value of your property, it might go up, but the taxes won't. And that's just an incentive tool that rural communities have to bring job creators in, because bringing jobs in is more important than getting property tax values going up, which eventually will go up. But it's just a kind of like a delay on that increase in property taxes. And some people like these, some people don't. I'm not here to debate whether or not we should allow for rural communities to have access to these sort of tax abatement programs. But when you single out just Bitcoin mining, then that's going to be a very serious problem. So that was an issue. The third one is it was Bitcoin miners over a certain size would have to register with ERCOT, and participate in the large flexible load program, which we don't have any problem with. That's great. There's other bills, in fact, that passed that have that stipulation in them. I think one passed where it said that they have to be, if they're over 75 megawatts, they have to register with ERCOT. We think that's great. We want to see more participation between ERCOT and these large loads, especially because the more we know and understand what's out there, we can also have a better understanding of what we can call on for any sort of emergencies that we have seen in the past. So the bill would have done those three things, and we really didn't like the first two. The last one is fine. What happened was the bill got introduced, and we kind of were like, as an industry and as a community, didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it because we're like, oh, this bill's like too crazy. Like it just targets us. There's no way anyone's going to let it pass. But unfortunately, a very powerful senator had introduced it and was very motivated to get it passed. There's a lot of theories out there why. Some people say it's the peaker plant industry. Some people say it's the gas industry or other loads that were participating in these ancillary service programs that didn't like having to compete against Bitcoin miners because the Bitcoin miners are so good at balancing the grid that they wanted to see that limited. And this is something that as a quick side note, that we have to be really cognizant of. If we don't engage in government, other industries and other players will that don't like what we're doing, and they will limit and restrict us. So this is part of the reason why it's very important that the Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining industry become highly, highly, highly engaged. Like we have to make sure that when these types of bills come up, that we are nipping them in the absolute bud. And in fact, maybe we are doing so much education on this issue, and we're so engaged. We're one of the five people, we're one of the five industries that these policymakers spend the most time with, that they understand our issue so much that when someone tries to introduce this stuff, they're just like, yeah, no, they're not going to let it pass. They're not going to let it get through committee. So the bill was put forward by a very powerful senator. We don't know the motive, although we can guess that it was backed by some powerful interests, and it went to committee. The first thing that happens with any bill is first you introduce it, get it drafted, introduce it, and then it goes to a committee, which is generally made up of anywhere from like 8 to 12 people, depending on what state you're in. In Texas, for this committee, it was 10, and with the tiebreaker being the chair of the committee if needed, at the 11th spot. So it goes to the committee, and as it's approaching the committee vote, all of a sudden we're talking to people, and they're all like, "Yeah, we're going to vote in support of it. And we're like, what? Why? Started meeting with them. Why are you going to vote in support of this? Well, powerful senator this, powerful senator that. And we were like, okay, so there's some sort of like unknown political headwinds that we're not previously aware of in the situation. And the bill ends up actually getting voted unanimously through committee, which was really, really bad. When a bill gets voted unanimously in the state of Texas, which means everybody voted in favor of it, it gets put on this like express calendar, which will allow the bill to move very rapidly and just like boom through the Senate. Like and nobody will vote against it, because in the Senate, unanimously in the Senate, that you don't vote against it unless it's something you really, really, really are like vehemently opposed to. And there's just not anybody that's like going to be vehemently in support of Bitcoin mining. Maybe we got a few people, but not really. In fact, when it went to the Senate floor vote, it did again pass unanimously. Not a single senator. One originally was going to stand behind us, and he was going to vote against it, but he ended up retracting his vote later on. So not a single senator. So all of a sudden, we're in the situation where this thing passed unanimously through committee, unanimously through the Senate, and now it's moving over to the House side. All of a sudden, we are like, okay, we need to go, on the Capitol lawn. And then we started engaging with policymakers, figuring out what we could do, talking to the committee on the House side to make sure that the bill didn't even come up for a vote. And that's ultimately what ended up happening. We were fighting very hard alongside the Texas Blockchain Council and also the Digital Chamber of Commerce to make sure that this bill literally just never came up for a floor or a House vote in the committee. And the benefit of that on the state level is that there's kind of like a calendar, there's like a timeline that you have to fulfill. In Congress, things can just go and go and go and go. They can be sitting in idle forever, and one day they pass. In Texas, there's like a deadline, which was May 29th. And on May 29th, when there was no committee vote, by de facto, the bill just died because it didn't make it through committee, never got to House floor vote, never made it to the governor's desk, which is what we were fighting for. Now, if it had made it through the House committee, it would have went to all these different offices trying to figure out who we can get to vote against this thing. When we were just able to pull that off. There were some things. I mean, there were moments in the lobbying efforts where we were like, wow, this just completely changed the way this thing was going. We were really concerned about where it was going, and we got it and had some conversations. And then on the outcomes of those conversations, which I can't quite share the details of, just want to respect the people that were involved. It was very significant in the general impact of where the bill itself was going. So I'll stop there. Obviously, that was a lot. I think that's just part of the reason why people need to understand in the Bitcoin space why it's so important that you become extremely engaged. Because if we were just mildly engaged, this bill would have passed. If we were just moderately engaged or even very engaged, the bill probably still could have passed. But we were lobbying, multiple days. I spent 8 hours at the Capitol one day. One of those days was with Pierre Richard. He was an absolute champion in this situation. Really was pretty impressed by how engaged she was. A lot of other mining companies were as well. Iris Energy got in there. Of course, we saw Riot becoming very engaged. US Bitcoin with Matt Persek was very, very engaged. And so we really love to see those miners show up. But if we were not hyper engaged, multiple days of lobbying, rallying at the Capitol on the lawn, I think this bill would have passed, and we would have seen, in some instances, Bitcoin miners just leave the state of Texas. And that would have been very unfortunate because Texas has been leading on Bitcoin mining. And when Texas is leading on Bitcoin mining, the United States the whole country is winning. Because the way the system is set up is that Texas, because of ERCOT, it sits outside of FERC. FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They oversee all the RTOs and ISOs except for ERCOT. It's the only one they don't oversee. And because of that, they're kind of allowed to kind of almost have this sandbox where they can do what they want, play around, have more experimentation. And when Texas is in a position to experiment and move forward on Bitcoin mining, it gives us the ability to take what we learned, the positives, and turn to the other RTOs and ISOs and turn to FERC and say, look at all the success that's happening in Texas because of Bitcoin mining. So if Texas would have been knocked out of that spot, I really can't reiterate quite enough what a negative outcome it would have caused for the whole country. I've had so many conversations as well where people were like, well, we're going to wait to invest in Texas and in America because we're not sure what's going to happen with this bill. People were highly concerned, and so the country.
Yeah, wow, that's pretty fascinating. I was following the bill, somewhat closely over Twitter over the last, I guess, couple weeks and month or so, and I didn't realize, how in depth and important it was. That's very awesome that you guys did that work and got that dead in the water. Um, Another bill that I know that people have been talking about in the past is that 30% proof of work tax. I think it was more of a federal bill. What's the status with that now? Is it dead? And how did it die?
So yeah, so I would say debt is the best way to explain it. But unfortunately, in Congress, things can come back to life very easily. But it's dead. It's dead for now. Is the way that I'd explain it. So what happened was this debt ceiling bill. Increasing the debt ceiling was the thing that Congress was most concerned about getting passed. And these are what we call must-pass bills. You got your budget bill and you got your deficit bill, or deficit increase bill, and you have to increase the deficit, otherwise the country will go default, right? So it's a must-pass bill, and oftentimes because you have to pass them. In these situations is a prime opportunity for someone who wants to pass that 30% tax to say, okay, we'll agree to X, Y, Z, this, and this, but we're going to slip this 30% tax in there. So I was very concerned that the 30% tax would get included. What ended up happening was, and I was having conversations, of course, with multiple members of Congress, from the moment it was introduced, all the way to the moment that it was, essentially temporarily killed, is what we'll say, uh, saying that they would, oppose this thing. They would get in the way. They would make sure it would never pass. That was great. I was loving the conversations I was having with our supporters. But you just never know. Just like in Texas, all of a sudden, wheeling and dealing, horse trading, as you call it, in the political world, can have things that these politicians never thought they'd get behind. All of a sudden, they're getting behind because there's other things that they got included that were more important to them, which I understand. This is just the way the political system works. When enough leverage is applied, sometimes things get pushed through that you wouldn't think would get pushed through. Well, we woke up to Pierre Richard having a Twitter back and forth with Congressman Warren Davidson, and he had mentioned that he saw the bill, Pierre saw the bill, and that the Dame tax was not included. And he had asked Warren Davidson if it would be included or was he missing. He said yes, that luckily because of part of the negotiations that there would be no new taxes. So this is something to keep in mind. In order to get the Dame tax killed, we kind of became very fortuitous in that the Republican side of the aisle in this situation, they basically negotiated that there would be no new taxes in the debt increase, the debt limit increase. And so that was very fortunate for us, and that's what resulted in this 30% tax no longer, being pushed forward right now, currently. But that's something that I think was important is for us to remember is we need to stay vigilant because this thing can come back up. I don't want anybody to be saying, Dennis Porter told me that this thing is dead and it's never going to come back. Unfortunately, that's not the way politics works. And it's part of the reason why so many people don't like engaging in politics, because you have to stay very vigilant and on top of these issues and make sure that it never comes back again in the future and that it never becomes part of the negotiation. So that's why, reiterating again, got to stay super active as Bitcoiners and people that care about Bitcoin to make sure that something like a Dame tax never gets passed. Because if that tax were to pass, I wouldn't say it would kill the Bitcoin mining industry overnight, but it would be very, very harmful. In fact, I was talking to a lot of people who said, I'm looking elsewhere because I don't want to invest in the United States and get hit with this tax. So sometimes people think, oh, well, technically a 30% tax wouldn't kill the industry. I'm like, yeah, but people are already putting in their head that I'm not going to even come to the United States until this thing is resolved. I've multiple conversations with the Texas situation. They were like, well, I'm worried about Texas and I'm worried about the Dame tax. And over and over and over again, people said, I'm looking elsewhere right now. And so that's why I was very glad to see that at least right now, we do not have to worry about that Dame tax. It could come up in the future, just like anything could. And then also, we do not have to worry about SB 1751, which was the anti-Bitcoin mining bill in Texas.